we would like to welcome everybody. Lincoln University Cooperative Extension in Missouri welcome you to the Small Ruminant webinar. The topic we are going to be talking today is about sheep and goats breeding. For sure, many questions that you have will be answered through the presentation of our invited speakers. And of course, you might write your questions and comments in the chat, and by the end, we will try to go through all of them. Lincoln University of Missouri is an 1890 land-grant university and receives support from USDA and the Agriculture Department of Missouri. I am Homero Salinas, Extension State Specialist here at Lincoln University. Now, Amy Bax will present it to our invited speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Salinas. My name is Amy Bax. I also work with the Cooperative Extension Program. I assist with small ruminants and some youth development programming here at Lincoln University. We have two speakers today. I'm extremely appreciative that they were able to give us their time today. Dr. Shanks, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
You bet. My name is Bruce Shanks. I was just a little bit about my background, just to kind of understand the perspective of kind of where I'm going to come from today as I answer the questions. I was raised on a small farm in southeast Missouri. We had cattle, but we also had sheep and goats. So I've been around small ruminants my whole life. Did an animal science degree at Missouri State University, and then got a chance to go on and work on my master's at Montana State University. Had the opportunity while I was at Montana to manage the Fort Ellis research station for sheep for that university. So got a kind of a Western experience from that opportunity. I then went on to South Dakota, did a PhD there in animal science and meat science, and owned a few sheep and goats with my family on a small farm there. So kind of have a little bit of a outside of Missouri perspective as well. Today, my family and I reside and own Sassafras Valley Ranch. We've got 600 acres and we lease about another 1,200 acres. South Pole Cattle, a registered cattle operation, is kind of our centerpiece. But we also have about 200 Katahdin commercial ewes and a few goats. They really complement our cattle operation, and we really appreciate that about them. We're very grass-based, try to run a real low input sheep and goat operation. That's kind of our focus. We supply some sheep and goats to a couple of research companies, and also conduct some trials here for about 4 different nutrition companies, and do a lot of that with sheep and goats as well. So still involved in some research. I'm still have a part-time position with Lincoln. After a 10-year career there where I taught animal science classes, including the sheep and goat production class, as well as did some research on sheep and goats, especially parasite resistance. And so still involved with Lincoln, just on a part-time role. And just a little bit, that's where I met George. George was a student of mine, and now George has worked for me for 7 years, and so he's going to be joining us today. We're just on our lunch break from working around the farm. So anyway, glad to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Shanks. We appreciate your time. George, would you like to introduce yourself, Mr. Pettig?
You bet. My name is George Pettig. As Bruce had said, I help him out on his farm. Myself and my wife, we own about 125 Katahdin hair sheep, and I'd say 60% of those are commercial and 40% are registered. I had grown up actually right outside of St. Louis, so I was a city boy up until about 10 years ago when I came to Lincoln and started my undergrad there. I had worked on the Busby farm at Lincoln, helping with research and animal care. I worked there for about 4 years, and then when I finished my bachelor's, I continued on and got a master's in sustainable agriculture from Lincoln as well. And I look forward to being here and answering any questions you have.
Great. Thank you, George. We appreciate you taking time out to be with us today. So I guess if you guys want to go ahead and start with answering questions, start with, I guess, what's the first one we have? Relates to timing and season.
Yep, you bet. So yeah, the first question relates to time of the breeding season and when to breed and that sort of thing. And so for us here, we're actually turning out rams tomorrow. So this is pretty timely, and that'll give us a March and April lamb. And for us, that does a few things. First of all, it avoids most of the bad winter weather. So we're lambing out on pasture, and so we want the weather to be decent. So turning in rams this week kind of accomplishes that. The other thing it does is it ensures that we'll start to have some pretty good forage for those ewes and does to graze on. We know their nutritional needs are increasing up to the end of right before lambing and kidding, and of course with lactation. And so, we're going to start having some pretty decent forage that time in the spring. So that timing also works well. But yet at the same time, to me, it's early enough in the year that the grass is not so tall and the parasite loads are not so large. And so we're sort of in front of some of that. And so for us, that's sort of worked out to be about an ideal time. We can have some nutrition, we can avoid some winter, grass is not so tall, parasite loads not so tall. One of the drawbacks to that is that does put us weaning, in our case, weaning some ram lambs right in the middle of summer. And so from a marketing point of view on those ram lambs, it probably, that time of year, that's a negative to that time of year. Doesn't matter so much on our ewe lambs. We're marketing those off the farm as replacements, but it makes it a little bit of a challenge marketing those ram lambs. So that's what we do.
Okay, thank you. George, you want to chime in?
Yes. So about everything Dr. Shanks does, I do similar with my commercial flock. About every point he touched, I feel similar about. I'm going to talk a little bit about our registered sheep because they have to be managed a little different for us. We lamb those in January and February and sometimes into March. And the reason for that for us is we sell some show lambs, and they have to kind of be born within January to March to meet those to meet the classes at the fairs and to be big enough to be competitive in the summertime. Now, the issue that we have with that is, first off, we have to turn our rams in the beginning of August, and we have some rams that they're not feeling up to getting to work when it's that hot outside. So that is one challenge that we struggle with, and a lot of times we end up not having lambs hitting the ground till mid to late January. I don't know if everyone's that way or ours are just a bit stubborn, but the weather is typically pretty terrible here January and February, so that is kind of a drawback of lambing that time of year, but it kind of has to be done. We have to bring those animals in and give them access to shelter, and we have to supplement the ewes a little more than our commercial flock in order to get them to raise their lambs and those lambs to grow well. We have to supplement with some feed and a little better quality forage. So that's a whole other beast, the registered side. As far as how we manage them, other people might do it differently, but that's kind of what we're looking at there. So
Let me unmute myself. Sorry. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your answers to the question. The next one, it looks like it's age. So age at breeding for both your males and females, and then sort of a terminal. How long do you keep them on your farm? Do you tend to cull them when they come to a certain age, or just when she's been open for 2 seasons? So can you talk about age on your operation?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and that's one that I'm pretty passionate about. We definitely are going to breed our doe kids and ewe lambs to have their first baby, you know, right around their first birthday. And so for us, we ewe lambs, doe kids that were born this spring, we're going to be exposing them starting tomorrow and asking them to lamb and kid on their first birthday. And so that's something I'm pretty adamant about. We just really don't want to manage and pay maintenance costs on an animal for an entire year that's not gonna give us a paycheck. So there again, for a low input operation, that's what we're doing. We will also use those ram lambs many times to breed with. This year, we're doing things a little bit different. We're going to use some 18-month-old rams and then one young one. But most years we're using ram lambs to breed with, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in a minute. As far as culling, age-wise, usually we turn our rams over yearly just because we can sell them as lambs the next year. In other words, use them as ram lambs this year, sell them as still a lamb next year. This year we did something a little different, but that's typical. On the ewes, we'll work our sheep once a year, right around the 1st of July. We'll get everybody in. That's when we're going to do some weaning, especially of ram lambs. But we're going to go through the ewes, and what we're looking at there, we're going to check their udder and make sure that it's functional. We're going to check their eyelids and make sure that they don't have a parasite problem. And we're going to check their teeth to see how old they are. And that's really that opportunity. And we'll make sure they also have good feet. And if they have some issues, we're going to cull them at that time. And it's, you know, if they start getting broken teeth or a parasite problem or whatever, because we know it's going to be a full year before we bring them back in and work through them. And so as far as agent culling, they kind of get to stick around here until they start having, a breakdown in terms of an udder or broken teeth or a parasite problem or whatever. But otherwise, we don't set a threshold age.
As far as my operation goes, it's pretty similar to Dr. Shanks. We expose our ewe lambs at the same age to lamb on their first birthday. We've noticed that if you don't do that, you can maybe get those ewes to mature, maybe at a little heavier weight, but you got another year without income on those ewe lambs. And we've just found it to be more profitable and long-term to go ahead and expose them. And if you're tied to that ewe lamb or something and she comes up open, sure, keep her another year. But if not, we try to send them down the road. As far as culling goes, we pretty much cull anything that has any sort of foot issues. We haven't had any parasite problems here recently in the past few years. So if they do, they typically do just tend to die on our place, and that's the same with Dr. Shanks. I guess just for example, yesterday I had picked up a couple ewes that I lent to a neighbor to clean up around her house, and I lent her an old ewe. I knew she was very old. I knew she had one front tooth left, and I said, well, when I come to pick her up for breeding season here, if she can't maintain her body condition, I'll take her to the sale barn. Well, I picked her up yesterday, and she is fat as a tick, and we'll give her another year. There's no reason not to, in my opinion. If she can maintain her body condition and raise lambs, I don't care if they're 7 or 15. And as far as rams go, we kind of use the same rams year after year, and so we kind of differ to Dr. Shanks' management system there.
What about your show sheep?
And yes, and our registered ewes, we do lamb those as yearlings, and typically, he brought up a good point. Our commercial lambs, when those ewe lambs are lambing on their first birthday, I'd say 95% of the time, maybe more, they're going to have a single lamb, just because they're smaller, they're not quite as developed. Now on our commercial, on our registered sheep, they've been fed a little bit. They're going to be a little heavier when they go to be bred their first their first year. And we've had quite a few twins and multiple births in that department. But once again, you're having a pour a little feed to them and a little more management there. So that's where we're at on that.
Okay. Looks like the next question is, you've talked about culling standards just a little bit, but maybe if you could speak a little bit about genetics, you know, that influence of sire or dam and what you're looking to try to influence and those kinds of things.
Here and I have an animal breeding and genetics background, but boy, in my sheep and goat operation, it's pretty simplified. We're really trying to identify those animals, whether it be a sheep or a goat, that can really thrive on a tough system, and we're not going to give them any extra inputs. We're not going to worm them. You know, we're going to make them raise their babies out on pasture and that sort of thing. So that's really been our focus. And so, you know, we're really going to keep a lot of ewe lambs and doe kids back, and kind of let them sort themselves out under my management and my environment. Expose them to lamb and kid as yearlings, and you know, hopefully survive and thrive in that environment. When it comes time to picking out rams, and I did mention that we've gotten where pretty well yearly we're going to use a new set of rams, and those are most going to be our ram lambs. And there again, we're going to pick out some sort of average looking rams in terms of phenotype. We don't like to pick out just the biggest and heaviest muscled and that sort of thing, but kind of in the middle. However, we're really going to evaluate them for parasites, especially checking eyelids and making sure that, you know, that they're very red and show no signs of parasitism. And so we're going to do that at weaning on ram lambs, and really sort the ones that we feel like are going to do the best in that regard, and use those rams, and there again, hopefully let the same with buck kids, and hopefully let the female side kind of sort themselves out. And there again, that sort of matches what my market is. Really, our bread and butter market here is selling ewe lambs and doe kids into actually mostly to cattle operators, and they're looking for something that's tough and can kind of take care of themselves. So that's our market, and so we try to match up our genetics to that market. So maybe a little different, a little simplified, maybe more than maybe what some people would say, but that's what works for us.
I'm going to go a little different direction than what Dr. Shanks was saying. I'm going to tell you what I look for in a replacement ram. For the most part, we keep or sell our ewe lambs. I mean, if there's one that's just not has terrible feet and legs, or is clearly parasite ridden, you know, we're not going to sell her as a breeding stock, and we're not going to keep her. But as far as rams go, in the commercial side, we really look for kind of shorter to the ground, fat, parasite resistant, early maturing. And my biggest pet peeve is good feet and legs. I want to talk a little bit about the registered side here. Now, we look at complete different traits on our registered rams. We look for obviously really correct feet and legs, but we look for a straight back, a lot of meat, length, and height on them. And that differs quite a bit from our commercial rams. And if you stand them side by side, it's pretty obvious. On our registered side, we're not quite as strict on the parasite resistance because of how we rotationally graze, and we really stay in front of the parasites anyway. But I just don't believe that our registered sheep are going to be near as parasite resistant, because we haven't looked, that hasn't been our centerpiece at looking for when keeping back replacements. I kind of want to touch on another topic. We used a terminal sire a few years back, and we had purchased a Texel ram, and then we used a Hampshire Suffolk cross ram. And what we tried to do is we took let's say the best half of our ewes, our best ewes, and we had bred those to Katahdin rams, and our goal there was to get replacement ewe lambs. And then we took our pretty common other half of our ewes, and we bred those to the Texel ram and the Hamp Suffolk ram to get terminal cross, fast growing, big boned lambs that are going to get to market faster and not and hopefully bring a little more money. We had success with that. There was no doubt in our minds that that terminal sire cross certainly produced bigger lambs. We didn't have any parasite issues on those in comparison to our Katahdins, although the downside on that is sure, those ram lambs might get to market a little quicker, but we're selling them in the summertime anyway, and they're not bringing much, whether they're finished in July or if they're finished in September. There's not a huge difference, so I don't really mind if it takes them a little longer to get finished. The biggest downside on that is any ewe lamb that we get out of those terminal sires, we can't sell them as breeding stock really, because no one wants to have to shear a half wool animal that you're going to have to shear. So you know, if there's $100 difference between taking a ram lamb to the sale barn and keeping a ewe lamb and selling her as breeding stock, you're losing that on your ewe lambs. You might be gaining a little bit on the rams, but if you're trying to raise breeding stock, it's definitely not the way to go.
Okay, and not to derail things, but there are some questions popping up in the chat, and a couple of them you're going to talk about later, so we'll wait on those. But I got two questions right now. How much do your kids or lambs weigh at breeding? If you do that first year before she'll lamb her kid on her first birthday, how much do they weigh when you breed them?
Yeah, we were kind of looking at each other here and guessing. Yeah, probably 60 pounds or so. That's on the ewe lambs. Doe kids, I don't know, maybe 45 or 50.
Yeah, see, I was thinking 50 probably on your doe kids if you're about that same age. So.
Yeah, and of course they're gonna grow, keep growing, well, for another year even. But yeah, they're gonna be fairly small.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question is about breeding brothers and sisters. You have issues, or do you prevent that, or do you separate them?
Right, and so by the nature of what I've been talking about, at least, you know, we haven't bought an outside ram in, well, since before George since he's worked here, we've never bought a ram, but it's probably been 8 years, and so we've been basically a closed herd since then. And so that's right, we are probably getting line bred to a fair degree, and yeah, in some instances we could even have, you know, a son mother mating and sisters and brothers and that sort of thing, and we don't worry about that too much. We do quite a bit of line breeding in our cattle. There's consequences to that. There's also advantages to it. You know, we feel like as long as we're picking rams that are working well for us, we're sort of encouraging those traits that we're looking for, even to a greater degree, and also reducing some variability. But at the same time, we're probably depressing some performance as well, and we recognize that. And there's a point where we'll probably have to go outside and bring some new rams in, and we'll be willing to do that as long as we don't step ourselves backwards in terms of toughness and parasite resistance. So
yeah, because there's always trade-offs in genetics. So
I don't think that's as much of an issue for George the way he does things.
I'd prefer just I haven't seen a negative impact on. We definitely do some line breeding, and the only difference I can perhaps say is in the registered world. It might be you got the papers to look at, and people might kind of question, you know, hey, is that right or not? But we obviously have. We definitely have some papers that have the same sire on both sides of the map there. So, you know, we kind of try to avoid it in the registered world a little bit on our management. But if it's the right mating, we just do it anyway.
Okay, well, so what's the old expression? It's line breeding when it works and it's inbreeding when it doesn't.
Correct.
That's right.
Okay, so the next category, I guess, of topic, setup, which would be size of breeding groups, ratio of males to females, things like marking harnesses, you know, heat patches, any of those things that you might use in your system.
Yep, you bet. And so we run our sheep and goats together. They're all in one flock, and we don't separate out any breeding groups. And so we're going to turn in about 6 rams tomorrow, and they're all going to go in. And so usually we're using ram lambs or buck kids usually. And so we would be somewhere in that 10 to 15 ewes per ram or buck. This year we're doing things a little bit different, using that older, a little older set of rams, and so they'll be more like maybe 35 to 40, 30 to 40 ewes per ram. And so that, you know, there again, if we're using ram lambs or buck kids, we'll cut that in half. I don't do anything beyond that. I don't use any marking harnesses, and I'm pretty simple that way. Nothing else.
As far as our commercial flock goes, we'll run anywhere from 1 ram to 30 ewes, sometimes up to 50 ewes. In last year, for instance, we had about 1 ram per 20 ewes. And one thing you got to remember is that'll really potentially can bring your lambing dates closer together. That the more ram power you have, they can obviously service more ewes and heat that specific day. And I want to say we had probably 85% of our lambs born in a 17-day window last year. And maybe that's something to look at if that's important to you. As far as our registered sheep go, we do kind of pick what ram we want to use on what specific ewes, and we do use breeding groups there. We have used instead of a marking harness, we've used a rattle paste or powder that can come in powder or paste, and it you actually just apply it with like a putty knife, and you paint it on the brisket of the ram, and when they mount the ewe, it'll leave that paint on their backside, and you can detect if they've been bred or not. And we kind of find that important on our registered flock, because we will have those rams in early August, sometimes late July, and it is kind of nice to know if those rams are actually getting to work, or if the ewes aren't cycling, or with that heat stress at those times of the year, it's if that ram isn't working or breeding ewes, we might try another ram. So that's a handy tool for us.
Hey, one thing
Do you apply that paste every day? That's a product I'm not familiar with.
It depends on how many ewes they're marking. It'll kind of get dry after maybe a week or so, and if they're marking a lot of ewes, it'll start to get kind of hard to see. But on our registered animals, they're usually a little more docile, so we can usually catch the ram up pretty easy and just put more paste on his chest. That's something that I know that's a pretty big thing over in Europe, in the sheep industry over there. That's a tool that they really use a lot of, is that rattle paste or powder. We've just had trouble with marking harnesses getting tangled or falling off of them, and
Or they'll lose their
this just gets a
crayon,
lot.
or yeah.
Right. It'll melt, or it doesn't come off on the ewes very well, and this stuff it works really good.
Okay, cool. Bruce, you were going to say something. I cut you off. I apologize.
Yeah, just something I thought of in terms of management, and something we do a little bit different there. Again, real simplified is we're actually going to leave those rams, and I guess it's something we haven't talked about yet. We're actually going to leave those rams in. So I'm going to put them out tomorrow, and they're going to stay out with the flock until July 1st or so. There's some pros and cons to that. First of all, I can have some late lambs, of course, by leaving the rams in that long, but we're also having those lambs at a nice time of the year. So at least I'm not worried about, cold weather. And that's kind of the key to getting them out when we do. That also means I don't have to keep those rams in a separate group, so they're a little bit easier to manage. And there again, we'll get them out, and usually we'll just sell them, and they're still considered just, they're going to be yearlings or still be classified as lambs. So they're the market on them still good. And so that's something we do, just kind of an ease of management deal, is leave rams and bucks out basically from now till July 1st. And we're keeping them out from July 1st to now, just so we don't have lambs and kids in the winter. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay, and I was going to ask a follow-up question on that line. So, George, do you have anything different to add? I was going to ask, like, how many cycles do you use? Like, here at Lincoln, we tend to do two 17-day cycles. So our ram stays in about 35 days. We've used cleanup rams in the past. If you leave yours in a long time, you clearly, Bruce, don't need a cleanup ram.
We do the same thing on our commercial side, and on our registered side. Usually what we'll end up doing is having 2 or 3 breeding groups, and then after 17 days, maybe 21 days, just to make sure that something wasn't a little off or something, we'll usually pull those rams out, and then we'll leave them out for maybe 10 days, and then put 1 ram back in with all of those. And leaving that 10-day window, ideally in the springtime when they're lambing, anything born, that'll give you a 10-day gap theoretically in your lambing period. And anything after that, is going to be out of that 1 single ram, and that gets rid of the having to take DNA samples on those lambs to just or determine parents but as far as our commercial stuff goes, no, we leave them out there, and typically we might have 1 or 2 late lambs that are born in May or June, but for the most part, they're all going to be in that first couple weeks of March and April.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, what's the next one? Which gets us right into management concerns. If you could speak about using CIDRS, flushing rations, the ram effect, those kinds of things.
Yeah, you bet. We don't use any CIDRS or ram effect in our operation. Probably as I've been describing our operation, that's probably not going to be a surprise to anyone. As far as flushing, most years we are very conscientiously going to put the flock on better forage, or maybe move them a little more often, not force them to clean up some areas. And so we're not feeding a flushing ration. However, we are going to move them to nice grass and rotate them on some nice grass about 30 days prior to breeding. And so in an effect, we're certainly conscientiously trying to get a flushing effect without actually feeding any supplement. And there again, the ewes are on really nice forage today, and we'll be turning in rams tomorrow. And then, as we progress on later in the breeding season, we'll as winter sets in, that quality of forage will decline, but we'll be past that flushing period. So that's what we do.
Okay, George?
We're very similar as far as just allowing the ewes to have the best possible pasture that's available at that time. And we like Dr. Shanks said, we try to be conscious and leave some better quality pasture or move them more often. Just one thing I want to touch on, and I kind of learned this from him, and he might just not have mentioned it, but we try to market low input animals here. So, maybe we're giving up on some twins by not or triplets by not giving them grain or flushing with soy hull pellets or something. But low input means low input, and there's no really way to get around that. On our registered side, we do use soy hull pellets about 30 days prior to breeding as a flushing regiment, and then we feed during late gestation and during lactation, because on our registered animals, for the most part, we're trying to raise some show lambs, and we want to give them every chance they can have. As far as that goes, we creek feed our lambs, starting with about a 20% protein supplement at birth. That's just on the registered side now, and those lambs and those ewes will have access to a barn with bedding and heat and fresh hay, water, and grain as well. But you know, it's two different management practices, and you got to find what works best for you and where you're trying to go, I guess.
Could either one of you speak about using CIDRS at all? Even though it's not something you use, could you give a quick and dirty?
Do you use them at all?
I have used them before, and I didn't. I just tried to use them on some like club lamb stuff before, and I actually didn't have success with them. But he has a different opinion, I'm sure.
Yeah, we haven't used them on our Katahdins, but back when my son was raising some club lambs, we would use CIDRS to try to, like George was talking about, get some ewes cycling in August, and well, we use some on some cattle from time to time too. They're a nice tool to not only synchronize estrus, but sometimes jumpstart estrus a little bit. There again, for us on our commercial deal when we're breeding, they're not necessary, but I think anytime you start monkeying with the natural system a little bit, that they can be a useful tool. And as we start talking about, you know, they're getting breeding at different times of the year, maybe even then I think they become something that you got to use. But for those that don't know about them, they're just a vaginal insert that's basically laced with progesterone, and they're going to trick the system into basically thinking that animal's bred, and then when you remove the CIDR, that's what's kind of synchronizing everybody, because then it shuts off that flow of progesterone, and anyway, certainly some producers use them and to good effect.
And saying we've had some success here at Lincoln. We've used them. We had an out of season breeding project where we were breeding Katahdins, and they were lambing in September and October. And so we were using CIDRS in April or whatever. And it was very successful. We had 53 ewes lamb on the same day. So it was extremely labor intensive, but we had a lot of control over that timing. That was a terrible, terrible day. I will say that.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see their usefulness in that type of a situation for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. Let me see where they fall in what we're talking about. Okay, let's go ahead and address these questions. There was a question, George, this is for you. Well, I guess, Bruce, you have experience with this too. What's the advantage to raising registered sheep, and what's the market like for that right now? Instead of raising, you know, your low input commercial, what's the desire there in registered sheep?
I'm going to be brutally honest here.
Please do. That's what they want.
Our commercial animals, the way we market them, are substantially more profitable than our registered animals. I know a lot of people that sell a lot of registered animals for a lot of money, and we are definitely not in that boat, so I cannot speak for them. But you know, we pretty much have a registered kind of a show flock, and then we have a commercial flock, and those registered animals for the most part are going to require a little more pampering, and part of that reason is because we are asking them to lamb in January and February, so naturally their lambs are going to need a little better care, and for what we have to put into those animals as far as registration, DNA, scrapie susceptibility testing, feed, little better quality hay. We can't sell, and I'm talking about us now. I'm not talking about every other registered producer, because there's some that sell thousands of dollars, you know, per head, and we're not there. But all those little things cut into the profit margin, and you know, we'd have to sell a registered animal for twice as much as we sell a commercial animal for it to even make economic sense. So if we were strictly in that for the money standpoint, we'd be in trouble. My wife and I like to show sheep, so that's kind of why we're even in the registered business at all. You know, it's just the way we manage our commercial animals. It's so cheap in comparison to our registered herd that it's just you know, it's night and day difference.
Bruce, you want to chime in? You've done club lambs.
Yeah, you know, and I definitely agree with George.
Bruce, I'm going to interrupt for a second. I can hear George loud and clear, but you're very hard to hear.
How about now? Is that better?
That's much better. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with George on what he said, and of course I'm in the registered cattle business too, so I have to kind of deal with it on that side of things, and definitely have to have some more money on the other end and have a market for it. But you know, and you know this, Amy, as well as I do. Your kids grew up showing sheep, and my son did, and George and his wife Jerry, they were both on the show team at Lincoln with me, and so you know I love that part of it. I wouldn't trade any of that for anything in the world, and so that's a fun part of the registered business that you know that is really good. But I do think you have to watch you have to watch the dollars and cents of it, and certainly it makes some sense in some scenarios and maybe not in others. So
I want to add one more thing, Amy.
Sure.
Just and he's gonna agree with me. He might be the one that told me this initially, but you know, there's just because they're registered doesn't make them a better animal by any means. Because if I have commercial animals that'll run circles around my registered animals every single year. I mean, they're just more profitable, and really, if the I mean, they're just better for our management system. They're better. I mean, in a way, it's bad to say this, but I feel like our registered flock, if you know, they're a lot needier, and they're just I feel like in a way they're kind of taking that breed kind of backwards in my eyes, and I'm gonna get some people upset for saying that, but they're just not as productive. And the whole goal of this is to have a productive animal. And I mean, it shouldn't matter if they're tall or short, if they're productive. But it seems like the register world's kind of going the wrong direction.
I'll say I used livestock as a tool to raise my children, and I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. I definitely enjoyed standing at the gate holding halters while they did their thing. And I would agree with you, the show ring and the pasture are two completely different worlds, and those animals can't flip and function.
Nope.
It's you do registered, I think, because you have a passion for the show ring, and that's a great world. It's a great place. It's not for everybody. It just isn't. And there's nothing wrong with either one. They're in very different worlds.
The registered side, it just doesn't seem like it's just, in the Katahdins at least, it doesn't seem like it's an extremely sustainable approach at raising an animal.
No.
I'm sure there's exceptions, but
yeah, they're very high input. Okay, another question we've got is, how long do you wait before you breed your ewes back after weaning lambs? So I guess if you're lambing in April, when do you wean? Because you're turning those rams back in November. So when do you pull those lambs off?
yeah, so that's right. We're going to mostly lamb in March and into April, and so we're going to wean about the 1st of July, and then breed those ewes back, now back into October. So not asking them to do anything more than that. So real straightforward.
Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, and then we've got one question that we'll leave for the end. You guys want to speak about accelerated lambing, which is 3 lamb crops in 2 years? Do you guys have any opinions or anything to weigh in on that?
Yeah, it's certainly not practical in most low input operations, and certainly not practical in mine to have that kind of lamb crop, accelerated lamb crop. It's going to take a lot of extra management. extra nutrition, and probably an early weaning in order to accomplish. And so for me, that just doesn't fit our management at all. We're going to ask ours to lamb one time a year, and that's it. I'll let George speak to that, and then I do have an example of some folks that are doing that successfully, though.
We have tried with our registered flock to breed some ewes back in the fall, and we haven't been successful. We haven't tried to use CIDRS or any sort of hormone replacement to do that, but just naturally we have not had success. I don't know if it very well could be a lack of nutrition. We just don't push them that hard anyway. I know a lot of people in the register world that are very successful naturally having fall lambs and getting 3 crops in 2 years. We're just not one of them.
I will say that I work and am acquainted with a couple of producers that are raising sheep in modified turkey barns, and also another producer that's raising sheep in a modified greenhouse. And so those ewes are staying indoors year round. And they're bringing all the feed to them, all the inputs to them. They're needing that extra production in order to become profitable. And so they're very much managing and early weaning and using CIDRS and adding some nutrition in order to produce 3 lamb crops in 2 years. So accelerated lambing is going to be very important for those folks. But they're again, they've got a lot of extra costs that they've got to try to offset by that. So it doesn't work. We don't do it in our system.
So sort of like registered sheep, it's what works in your system.
That's
Right.
Okay. There is a question about finding a realistic and useful, like a budget program, like to put together a business plan, say for like a commercial goat operation or commercial sheep. Do you have any advice on finding that kind of program?
Yeah, I got a couple on it. For me, my operations is pretty simple, and so we can just track some things on some self-built Excel spreadsheets. I do know that on the Ag Eb University of Missouri website, they've got a budget at least for some sheep operations, so the viewers might be able to search and find that. And I think George has got a couple ideas.
We personally, we budget everything and we enter everything into a spreadsheet to kind of see where we're at the end of the year. Whether it's good or bad, we kind of find out at the end of the year when we add everything up. I have used a budget calculating tool on, I think it's a Maryland small ruminant page, that I found to be very helpful and eye-opening. It's a really good tool, but it can kind of make you feel silly, and but it's eye-opening, and I think it's very important to kind of keep you in check with the economic side of the industry. So
yeah, sometimes you're not spending money always in the places you think you are. We did a little adding up some things, and dog food becomes one of our highest price things. You know, guard dogs are expensive. Mm-hmm. They're a very necessary tool, but they're actually one of my largest expenses. But you know, I definitely think in a commercial operation, you've got to watch where you're spending money, and certainly some of those spreadsheets and some of those tools are out there, and they are useful.
If the person that asked earlier about registered versus commercial animals, that's a really good tool to kind of open your eyes at how much more it costs to raise registered animals in a different management system. Because like I said earlier, if you add up registration costs, DNA, and scrapie susceptibility testing, I mean, you're at roughly $50 right there, and that's not even that's not including your shipping on blood and anything else, feed or anything. So it's a really useful tool. It's very important.
Okay, thank you. Another question: if you're working your herd or flock just once a year, so for Bruce, like in July, Do you trim feet? Do you trim feet only when it's needed, or have you selected for those sheep that really, or goats that don't need to be trimmed? How do you manage feet?
Yeah, we used to trim feet. I don't know if anybody's ever done that, but when you go to trimming that many feet in a day, it's a pretty long day.
Bruce, you're hard to hear.
Yeah, we used to trim. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
We used to trim feet some, and when you're trimming that many feet, that's a pretty long day. Kind of a tough a tough day. And I remember one time my wife, it's been several years ago, she said, "Boy, it seems like you spend a lot of time on sheep and goats and relative to your cattle, and yet she understands where a bulk of our income comes from." And so I really took a step back when she mentioned that, and now what we do is we don't trim feet. If we've got something and we're on rocky ground too, so that helps. But if we've got something that's got a foot problem or whatever, we're going to try to catch her in July when we work them. And that's why I mentioned that we do check not only teeth and eyes, but also udders and also feet. So.
George, got anything to add?
Yeah, I'm just gonna add my 2 cents. We had, I can't believe I'm willingly admitting this, but we had a terrible year about 3 or 4 years ago with foot rot. And
I think everybody did.
That's the first we learned about it. We let it go too long, and then it turned into a whole summer of trimming hooves, culling. It is very expensive and very time consuming, and it's something I don't feel like you can just disregard. But yeah, it's something I think you should select for. And we also don't trim hooves. I don't know if that's being. I want to say it's a management. It's management that we've selected for that, but they might have 6-inch long toes. I don't really know, but they don't limp. So we just try to get rid of the ones that have needed that, and we're kind of where we're at now, and we don't have to. So and we're in a kind of where our sheep are at, we're kind of in a wet creek bottom, and that's kind of ideal for hoof growth and foot rot and foot scald. So
yes, it is. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. There is one more question that's popped up here in the chat. It's not breeding related, but I think you guys can answer it. What type of shelters do you have available for your sheep? Are they in each pasture? Do you choose like tree cover? What do you do?
Yeah, that's a real simple one for me. I don't have any shelter. So ideally I'd like them to, have some trees and that sort of thing. But realistically, that's not even going to be the case with me. And so that's why it is paramount that I don't lamb or kid until the weather's pretty decent, because it's nasty out today. It's raining and cold, and they don't have any shelter. That's why we got to have pretty tough animals here.
All my sheep are on rented ground in a large hayfield that doesn't have a tree in it. The whole perimeter of it's surrounded by trees, so certain times in the day they can at least get a little shade, but there's zero cover there and zero shade. And like he had said, that's kind of why we lamb when we do.
Yeah, so when we've had some trouble in the past with like lambs getting trampled because they all try to pack into one little tiny shelter, they've actually done better when we don't provide it. There's another question about feet. What characteristics are you selecting for when you're breeding for good feet? I mean, I've always heard white feet are soft. So, I mean, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I guess I'm not going off of the hoof color or that. I'm looking more, and I'm not going to hold my hand up here and try to tell you what a good hoof and leg looks like. But if you go on the internet, you can find kind of what a good structured feet and leg looks like. And I like mine to be kind of their feet pretty much directly under their leg. I don't like them with their feet way out like that. I don't know if you can see that. But that is my biggest pet peeve in anything that I look at in our animals, aside from parasite resistance. And I've heard that black hooves, they supposedly are less susceptible to foot rot and foot problems. I I'd like to see some research proving that. I haven't seen anything.
I don't
so-
think there's anything statistically significant to that at all. Okay, there are no more questions in the chat, so I'm gonna tell my Facebook audience we've got about another 2 minutes with our resident experts here, Mr. Pettig and Dr. Shanks. So if you have any questions, especially pertaining to breeding, especially with commercial flock, now would be the time to type it in the chat. If you do not have any questions at the end of this presentation, I have a small survey monkey that I would like to, I'm going to post in the chat, and you guys can log in and tell us how we're doing. If we're answering your questions, if we found a topic that's interesting, and if there's other topics that you might want to hear about. It should take you about 2 minutes to finish, and it would really help our program if you would take the time to finish that survey for us. And I'm not seeing any other questions. So you guys must have done a really good job covering everything. Oh, yeah, this was very informative. So yeah, 2 thumbs up here. I do want to tell our Facebook audience that our next presentation is on November 12th. We're going to talk to Dr. Ken and Mrs. Linda Coffey. They are from Prairie Grove, Arkansas. Ken is a nutrition professor at the University of Arkansas, and Linda is a specialist for ATRA. And they're going to talk about feeding small ruminants through the winter time, because they, there's special concerns and forages and degrain them and all that good stuff. So that'll be on November 12th. And seeing no more questions, gentlemen, I thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it very much. If there are more topics in the future that you guys are oh wait, are you marking open ewes in May or just noticing no udders in July? How do you pretty much get all your ewes settled? Oh, Linda. Hi, Linda. Are you marking how do you know who's open? I mean, just when you wean them, they don't have a lamb with them, or what are you doing?
Yeah, that's basically it. We'll try to find a freeloader that's extra fat with no udder or no udder development, and like to, yeah, we're going to get them out of there then, and we'll have those, of course.
Okay.
So.
Okay, fantastic. I thank you very much. Dr. Salinas, do you have anything else to add?
Yes. Well, thank you so much to Bruce and to George. It was a very wonderful talking, and especially because your experience sharing with all the people. We want to thank the assistance of this webinar. So don't miss the next webinar for all the people that is connected. And we would like to say it, you want to say here in the chat. So we made sending you a certificate for your participation. So we have some of the names for the people that commented, and but some others we don't know who were connected. So we thank you so much, and we are going to finish now. Again, Bruce and George, so much thank you for your time, and we appreciate very much your experience, and for sure we are going to invite you again. I don't know, you want to make a conclusion, Bruce and George, and just to say bye to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Thanks everybody for joining in. We enjoyed it. Plus, it gave us a break from the nasty weather for an hour. So now we got to go back to work. But just, I guess one last thing I'd say is this is just what works for me. And you got to find what works for you and your operation. And that may not be, that may be a better part of mine or something that George said, but maybe not a cookie cutter deal. But anyway, thanks a bunch.
And I want to add that, like he had just mentioned, I've had lots of people show up to look at our sheep, and we get laughed at. They're just not what they're wanting. It's the Katahdin breed, at least, and there's many different shapes and sizes within that breed, and you got to find what works for you. I appreciate you asking me to do this, and hope to be back.
We'd love to have you. Thank you very much for participating. We appreciate everybody's time and attention today. I think this has been really informative, and I look forward to November 12th when we listen to feeding concerns, winter nutrition for small ruminants.
Okay, safe.
Everybody have a good rest of your day.